afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I'm Frank Billingsley and a part-time resident here in Provincetown and a volunteer for the Provincetown Book Festival. I want to welcome everyone to the I live in Orlando and I'm not here. I also used to be the mayor's chief of staff in Orlando, so I'm used to welcoming people to Orlando. But anyway, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Provincetown Library and to this year's edition of the Book Festival, which has really been a wonderful experience. I recognize a lot of faces here, and I know a lot of people have been to multiple sessions, but there's definitely been lively conversation, stimulating thought, and I think a lot of new friendships made too over the last couple of days. There are a couple of people, a little housekeeping I'd like to recognize that are here, and one is Amy Raff. Amy is the director of this beautiful library. And then also Nan Senator. Nan is the organizer. I think you all know Nan by now, but anyway, she's the organizer of the book festival, and this is a lot of work. It's a year-round job, I think, and the work is quite impressive. And then, like I said yesterday, all of this work really enriches our lives and the lives of many people beyond that are in this room, as well as making Provincetown just a more exciting and better place to be. So thank you so much. And we should also just recognize and thank the library staff that are here, as well as any board members, or any board members or library staff here. If they are here, raise your hand. Yes, okay. Thank you. The assistant director is here. Say hello. Okay. And then, of course, it's always good to recognize sponsors because they help make an event successful, and make sure you reference your program, as well as I think on the poster here, to just make note of the sponsors. Today's session is really exciting. I'm personally excited about being here and learning that the session is Shirley Chisholm, her biographer, and her speechwriter in conversation. And I love the conversation part of this, and I think this is going to be really interesting. It'll probably be almost like having the Congresswoman here with us in terms of what we learn. And then following the conversation, she is here, right? And then following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. And I do want to let everyone know that Anastasia's book is for sale in the room just past the desk there, as well as all the other books. Yeah, let's do a plug for that, Anastasia. Very good. You want people to buy that book, and I know folks will enjoy that and not be disappointed. And all the books, actually, from the book festival are available in the room, again, just beyond the desk there. So I'd like to first introduce Anastasia Curwood. Anastasia is a professor of history and director of the Commonwealth Institute for Black Studies at the University of Kentucky. She specializes in the history of African American women, gender and sexuality, the Black family, and African American intellectual, political, and cultural history in the 20th century. Her first book was titled Stormy Weather, New Negro Marriages Between the Two World Wars, and was published in 2010. Her second book, which we're here to learn more about today, is Shirley Chisholm, Champion of Black Feminist Power Politics, and that was published just this year. Hold the book up again. You want to buy that. Anastasia is the recipient of numerous grants, honors, and fellowships over the years. And Anastasia is a native of Massachusetts from Cambridge and earned an undergraduate degree at Bryn Mawr and a master's and doctorate degree at Princeton University. And on a personal note, I know she enjoys spending time with her partner. Her mom is here today too, right? Yeah. Where's her mom? Where's her mom? Yes, hello mom. Without mom, this would not be happening here today, so thank you for that. She enjoys spending time with her partner, her dogs and cats, and they live on a farm outside of Lexington, Kentucky. She is a devoted horsewoman, and when I was researching her a little bit online, I found a picture of you, which is very impressive because you were on a horse. I think it was you, on a horse. The horse is jumping over a big wall. I don't know what you call that in horse lingo. And then on the other side of the wall is a lot of water waiting for them to land in. So I was very impressed with that. So, okay. I'd also like to introduce our model here, Bob Frishman. Bob graduated from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and then worked on Capitol Hill, serving in congressional staffs from 1973 to 1983. And for the final 3 years, during Congresswoman Chisholm's last years in public office, he was her speechwriter and press secretary, which, as we all know, is a very key support for any elected official. After his time in Congress, Bob wrote a book challenging the conservative pro-family movement for the public interest group People for the American Way. Bob has served in leadership roles with numerous libraries and is working on his own book, which is a biography of colonial Philadelphia clockmaker Edward Duffield. Did I say his name right?
You did.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. When I was researching Bob a little bit online, I did the Google search, and all this information popped up, and I thought it was the wrong person because it was somebody that was very much into and recognized in the world of repairing clocks and watches. And I learned a new word, at least for me, horologist.
You got it.
Which is a person that specializes in the repair of clocks and watches. And you'll be amazed to find out that, one, he owns a business. It's called Belltown. And Bob has restored over 8,000 clocks, which is pretty amazing. Do we have any clocks that need repaired in here? Any watches or anything? Okay. So that to me was very impressive as well. Bob lives in Andover, Massachusetts, with his wife, Jean Shinto, who also is a writer. So with that, let's turn it over to these two distinguished guests and get the conversation started. So thank you again, and welcome.
Great, thank you.
You're going to need to take it out of this thing.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Not only am I representing Mrs. Chisholm visually, but I was fortunate enough to find a recording of a speech that she delivered at Gordon College in 1984. Not one I wrote. She had already left Congress by that point. But this is the third time that Anastasia and I have done this show together. And the second time we did it at the Boston Athenaeum, I had this recording available. And it's just, I think as you'll agree, it's just not only important to actually hear her voice, but to sort of feel her presence. And I think she's still here with us in many ways, as we'll talk about. But if we could have just 90 seconds of Shirley Chisholm, this will, I think, set the stage.
I can't tell you how many times we've tested this.
Bluetooth has a mind of its own.
Wasn't that great?
That
So
was
now she speaks very softly, but
Oh, she does. Hold the mic to the.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to speak with you on one of the most controversial topics that's reigning across this land at this particular point in time. And I'm sure that some of the statements that I will make this morning might not be consistent with some of your beliefs and some of your attitudes towards aspects of the topic. But it is important to provoke people's thinking. We cannot afford to be complacent and quiescent, because we must remember what the founding fathers were all about when this country came into existence on the basis of a revolution. When the people in the 13 colonies refused to continue to be governed by a government in which they had absolutely no representation, and the cry taxation without representation became the rallying point for the American Revolution. We must also remember that many people came to this country on the basis of fleeing from their own homelands because of economic, political, and or religious persecution. And so it is in light of this particular background that I wish to speak this morning on the topic of religion and politics. After more than 2 decades,
Almost makes you want to cry, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And I also should introduce Paul Cunningham, who we were the 2 members of the White Boy Caucus in Mrs. Chisholm's office. So we had some great times together, and we still do. It's great that we're still friends and still in touch. Paul's here in Provincetown half the year, so it's wonderful that you could be here and that we both can sort of remember those days with Mrs. Chisholm. So I think in the usual format, I don't have a book to read from, but she does. So I think we'll start with the reading, then we'll have our conversation, and then I hope some of you will be moved to ask us questions that we hope we can answer.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. The thing about Shirley Chisholm is that she connected people far and wide, and everywhere I go, there's a Shirley Chisholm connection. Not just the fact that I'm speaking here, but that Paul's here. The cab driver yesterday had met Mrs. Chisholm. That I keep meeting people here who appreciated and knew of her or knew her. I'm going to read a part of one of the later chapters of the book today because, first of all, it's where Bob makes an appearance. So I haven't read this part when we've appeared at the Athenaeum and at the Harvard Bookstore. I didn't read the part that mentioned you. But I figured I might as well today. It's especially useful because it's important to understand that Shirley Chisholm did run for president in 1972, and that's a monumental achievement. She ran a national campaign. She ran to win, even though she knew it was unlikely she would win. She ran to win. And that is a deserved claim to fame. What many people do not understand is that in addition, she was a formidable congresswoman, and that she served in Congress for 10 years after she ran for president. She's still there, and she was on the Rules Committee, which I know at least 2 people in this room know what a big deal that was. She was the first woman on the Rules Committee. So these couple of pages that I'll read are from the later, describing what the office was like in the later years of Chisholm's service in Congress, and it just happens to mention our friends. So this is about 1976-77. Inside the DC office, talented young politicos helped Chisholm keep up the good fight. She functioned as an other mother, that is, a woman who's performing mothering duties to people who were not her biological children. And they responded by performing filial duties, especially those that helped Chisholm maintain her aesthetics. For the price of shuttling their non-driving boss in their personal cars, and Chisholm had exacting standards for the cleanliness of the car and the quality of the driving. Dropping off dry cleaning and wigs. and occasionally needing to retype letters that Chisholm had smudged fashion fair makeup on, the late 1970s, early 1980s cohort was thrilled to have the opportunity to work in the heart of the action. For her part, Chisholm saw the young people who worked for her as her own children. She did not have personal photos of her own family on her desk. She merely had a signed photo of Jimmy Carter and photos of children of staff members. Later, she identified mentoring her young staff and seeing their subsequent achievements as one of the great pleasures of her job. In addition to several long-timers, a few new faces had arrived. Bevan Dufty, a young white man whose parents were involved in the Harlem cultural life, had been hired on as an intern in 1976. He joined the permanent staff and was in charge of driving Chisholm to the Democratic caucus meetings when she was secretary, plus doing her basic shopping. But his favorite parts of the job were driving Chisholm out to shop in the new Bloomingdale's at the brand new White Flint Mall, and the witty and sometimes bawdy repartee in the DC offices. Dufty in turn hired a young intern, Paul Cunningham, in 1978, who became a legislative assistant the following year. Cunningham was drawn to the inclusive climate of the office and the chance to work on fighting oppression through the legislative process. He would become Chisholm's aide on the Rules Committee in 1981. Laura Murphy, a native of Baltimore, joined the office in 1977 after graduating from Wellesley and working for Perrin Mitchell for a short time. The daughter of a very political family, one branch of which published the Baltimore Afro-American, that's a storied black newspaper, had grown up tagging along on her parents' campaigns and had met Mitchell while working on her father's campaign for a judgeship in 1970. Mitchell promised Murphy a legislative assistantship after her graduation from Wellesley, and when she graduated in 1976, she became one of the youngest legislative assistants on the Hill. She loved the job, but was rankled by Mitchell's refusal to pay women staffers as much as men. This was why Bevan Dufty was able to recruit her to Chisholm's office, where Murphy immediately received a raise of several $1,000s. She worked on tracking non-committee assignment-related issues, and when Chisholm was assigned to the Rules Committee, Murphy also had the job of briefing her boss on the array of bills that came through. She loved the job and her boss, excited by the opportunities she got from the moment she was hired. For her, it was a thrill to be part of a cadre of women following their boss through the halls of Capitol Hill, watching Chisholm's combination of charm and strength in action. Press Secretary Bob Frishman arrived in Chisholm's office in 1980. He had worked for John Conyers for 7 years, but had recently quit. He stopped by Chisholm's offices one day to recruit help on the Jerry Brown presidential campaign. And his friend Brenda Pillars asked him, "Oh, Bobby, are you here for the job?" "What job?" Frishman replied. Pillars sent him home to get a coat and tie for the interview, and he finished the day as Chisholm's new press secretary and speechwriter. Despite his official role, however, he also found himself as Chisholm's principal driver in an old Jaguar that he kept parked under the Rayburn building. Chisholm was particularly delighted when people thought it was her car, as happened when she attended a reception at the Vice President's Naval Observatory mansion. Frishman and his wife, Jean Shinto, on occasion felt filial responsibility for his boss. The couple took the Congresswoman for dinner once, and in a rare moment of self-disclosure, Chisholm mentioned her difficult relationship with her mother and sisters. Memorably, one day Bob received a letter that requested he give Chisholm a kiss on the writer's behalf. After he briefed her, to Frishman's surprise, Chisholm declared, "You may," and tilted her cheek toward him. He obliged and left the office bearing the inevitable makeup smudges. Years later, he too recalled the respect and affection he received in the office. In contrast to others on the Hill, Chisholm had no unpleasant private persona that differed from her public one. "I never really felt like she was my boss anyway. I felt pretty much that we were colleagues, and she made me feel that way," he remembered. Carolyn Smith was still the center of the office, keeping things running and her boss on track. Smith worked on Chisholm to decrease the makeup and return to wearing her natural hair. She'd been wearing wigs. Mrs. Chisholm, you've got to do something about this makeup. You got it from one side of your head to the other, Smith recalled telling her boss. Chisholm did visit Smith's stylist, who shampooed and styled the Congresswoman's natural hair. Chisholm seemed pleased with the look, but on the way back to the Capitol, she pulled the wig out of her bag and placed it back on her head. Back in the office, Smith was waiting for her boss, having talked with the salon on the phone about how well the styling session had gone. When Chisholm walked in wearing the old wig, Smith was taken aback. Under questioning, Chisholm admitted that she thought people liked her hair when she wore the wigs. Furthermore, she was starting to go gray. Eventually, Smith and Chisholm worked out a compromise. The salon would shampoo Chisholm's hair regularly, and the stylist at the wig shop would begin adding a few gray hairs here and there over time. Chisholm was all too aware that in an era of rapid time media, appearance mattered. For Black women, it was especially critical.
Thank you for choosing the best section of the book. No, that was good, and I think it was important to talk about her humanity. You know, there's everybody sort of knows, you know, about the political part, but she was, you know, a real person, a real woman, and that was a big part of it for who she was, and us, Paul and I, working for her as well.
Was that correct? I've never asked you if I got it right.
Yeah, oddly enough, it was right. Yeah, I can't say I've been quoted correctly my whole life, but you did it. No, you did it perfectly. And in fact, I was going to talk about that too, because I remember sort of the stunning realization when she thought people thought that my Jaguar was her car. You know, it seemed like the last thing in the world that Shirley Chisholm would be in is a XKE, you know, two-seater English car, but she thought that was great, and she quickly mastered the way to sort of swing your legs out, because these were hard cars to get in and out of. But she got that, and at that vice president's reception, you know, there were all these black limos pulling up, you know, with Strom Thurmond getting out of it and everything. And then there's, you know, you know, and everybody's like, who the hell is this? You know, and then to see Shirley Chisholm swivel out of that car, you know, the jaws dropped 6 inches at least. It was a wonderful scene, and one that I can't say it was the best moment of my life with Shirley Chisholm, but it certainly was close. But I know we should speak, you know, perhaps more substantively about this as too. And there is the origin story of that involves Mom, of how you came to write this book, and maybe you know, she should get her accolades as well to, you know, what sparked you to do this biography.
Thanks for that question. For those of you who examine or purchase the book, you can turn to page 351, and there is a photograph of my mother there, and my father, and the Massachusetts head of the Massachusetts campaign for Shirley Chisholm for president in 1972. There, the four of them, and Shirley Chisholm herself, the four of them are in a hotel room in Cambridge. You never told me what hotel it was, or if you remember.
I can't remember. Sorry.
And so this is a photograph taken by a family friend of ours, Michael Dobo, who is a photographer, photographed a lot of music celebrities in the 70s, really talented. And so he was there, and he was photographing Chisholm's campaign stop in Massachusetts. And she was drafted in Massachusetts. She wasn't originally planning to run, but there was a Massachusetts Liberal Caucus in January '72, and she got second place behind McGovern. And so she decided, okay, I'll run a campaign, you know, I'll do several visits in Massachusetts. And so Mom wound up being the treasurer for the campaign. And there was a storefront on River Street in Cambridge that was rented for the purposes, but they had enough to rent it, but not enough to get the furniture. So there was, it was just an empty space. Everybody would sit on the radiators for meetings, and Mom would go and open all the envelopes with donations in them from Rockefellers and people like that, and then get the deposit ready and go to the bank and make the deposit. Anyway, this photograph that's in the book, it is the genesis of the book, because what happened was I saw it as a 6, 7, 8-year-old girl, and I thought that Shirley Chisholm was my aunt, because my Auntie Sally dresses a little bit like Chisholm, or dressed like her, had wigs, had really sharp, modish 70s style clothes. So I thought it was Auntie Sally, and I don't know if it was my mother or my father who said, "No, that's Shirley Chisholm. She ran for president. You could too." And I did consider it. And it took me a few years, but I decided not to run.
It's not too late.
And now I know too much. But imagine being a young black girl who just sees this as a matter of fact. Oh yeah, that's Shirley Chisholm. She ran for president, and you could too. And that this was repeated. She has this inspirational quality. This was repeated across the country for who knows how long. For me, I grew up with just understanding that a black woman had done what Chisholm had done. But when I became a historian. I didn't run for president, and I was thinking about a project. We write these books, and I was thinking about the next project to do, and I decided I really wanted to write a biography. And as scholars do, we teach a course on something that interests us before we write the book. So I taught a biography course, and I said, "Oh, it'd be great if I could assign a biography of Shirley Chisholm. Let me find who's written one." There were children's books. Susan Brown Miller wrote a kid's book, a young adult book, but there was no serious cradle-to-grave biography of this person, this incredible foundational figure in kind of post-civil rights era politics, and an innovator. She's the first black feminist on Capitol Hill. And now we have the Squad, and they correctly understand their own political genealogy with Chisholm. But she's the first one practicing this combination in what we call an intersectional politics now, but she was doing it before. We had the name intersectional. She's bringing in multiple aspects of people's identities and understanding where common interests were. That we might not all be interested in raising children, but you might be interested in civil rights. Well, then that connects to education. You might not be interested in the plight of domestic workers, but you're probably interested in your own minimum wage. So why don't we amend the minimum wage bill to include domestic workers? So she's doing that, and it was staggering to me that she didn't have a biography. It still is staggering to me that I thought for sure I would get scooped. I was absolutely certain someone else is going to get to this. It took me 15 years to write the darn book. But nobody did, and I have some theories about that, but I think let's dialogue instead of monologue.
Okay, the monologue's great though. So I'm just trying to bring you the next monologue subject. But I have to say that after reading your book, I realized that even when I worked for her, I knew about 10% about her life, and certainly I knew nothing much about what she did after she left Congress. So, that was hugely informative too. And to think that I worked for her for those years, but really didn't understand much about her past history to the extent that you ferreted out. And one of those is that whole issue of the time she spent in Barbados and essentially her Caribbean heritage, which is different and pivotal to her life experiences compared to if she had come from a Southern American black background. So probably that's another good thing to talk about, and it isn't something that, you know, I think is as widely known as the rest of her biography.
Shirley Chisholm's parents were born in Barbados. This is a little bit tricky because her autobiography, Unbought and Unbossed, or her first memoir, she wrote 2 memoirs, said that her father was from Guyana. Her siblings were quite perplexed about this, especially her sister, who I was lucky enough to talk to. She said, I don't know why Shirley said that our father was from Guyana. He was from Barbados. He was baptized in Barbados. And indeed, so I confirmed what she told me. I went to Barbados. It was a very difficult trip. But I had to go. And I went to the Department of the Archives. All the genealogical records are there. I went back and I sure did trace her father's family for several generations in Barbados. The men were coopers. They were making barrels for rum. And they were descended from enslaved folks in Barbados. How did all those black folks get to Barbados? It's a British colony, just like here, although we actually had French and Spanish and Dutch people importing enslaved folks here too. But you know, she was enslaved. She was the descendant of enslaved people from Barbados, and the industry, the crop was sugar. The crop was sugar cane. The industry was sugar and rum, and that was how her family had toiled. In Barbados, however, there's an emancipatory tradition. Barbados actually celebrates Emancipation Day, which until recently in the US we seem to kind of not care about. And especially her grandmother, had an edge that was very influential to the young Shirley Chisholm. Her grandmother was a domestic servant, was a cook, well respected as a cook, but still at the mercy of white Barbadian families who didn't really respect her time, kept her at all hours, and that was the job that she had. But what Chisholm saw was the dignity that her own grandmother asserted to herself, and the respect that her own grandmother had. And then this woman, her grandmother, also encouraged the young Shirley to be outspoken, to the horror of Shirley's own mother, who always tangled with her. But Chisholm's Barbadian parents moved to New York in the late teens, early 20s. Actually, I think they're both in I can't remember, somewhere around between 1919 and 1922. They moved to New York. And they had known each other in Barbados, but then they met again in New York. They fell in love, they got married, they had 3 daughters, boom, boom, boom. They're trying to work, and they have these kids at home. And so they said, why don't we send the kids back to Ruby's mother in Barbados? We can save money feeding these kids. We can send a little bit of money home that will go a long way, and they will get a better education in the formerly British colonial skills in Barbados. And that is, that schooling there, which Chisholm somewhat romanticized later in her life. Oh, they were so tough on us, and we really learned, and you just had to do it. What I hear her saying there is that the expectation was for excellence from every student. And in the United States, living in the Jim Crow US, I don't say Jim Crow South, I say the Jim Crow US, because Jim Crow was in New York, Jim Crow was in Provincetown, Jim Crow was in Georgia. In the Jim Crow US, the expectation for young black children and the resources allocated to young black children was not as great as what was in Barbados. And in Barbados, the dumbest kid in the class was black, the smartest kid in the class was black. There were black teachers, there were black leaders. And so she lived in that world where her grandmother was a figure of respect. She had teachers, fellow students, where she was able to see the possibilities of achievement. She said it was really, really important to be around her grandmother and in those schools for her own confidence. I don't know if her confidence needed a lot of help because she was a very confident person in general, but it just kind of struck a chord with her, and she remarked on it through her whole life. She remarked on how important that had been. Then she did return to the United States. She said it felt like a foreign land coming back. She missed her grandmother, never saw her grandmother again, but was still carried that sense of confidence with her. And so, and in Brooklyn, where the family was, there was a building tradition of Caribbean achievement in politics. So all the black people who had been able, and they were mostly black men, the black people who had been able to break into politics tended to be from Caribbean islands. So she was in that tradition. She just happened to be a woman. But those were the people mentoring her, including Mac Holder. Yeah. Who was from, no, he was from Guyana. Yeah. So that Caribbean background is incredibly important to her. I've had some Twitter haters who have said, well, Shirley Chisholm wasn't really a U.S. black person.
Oh, wow.
And there's a movement that says that, you know, only real black people are American descendants of slavery. And to which I say, Shirley Chisholm's family emerged out of the Middle Passage, emerged from chattel slavery, hereditary chattel slavery. Not in the U.S., but to not understand the diasporic repercussions that this is a the black diaspora in the Americas is incredibly important to understanding what's going on in politics in the U.S. and also how she approached politics later. We can talk about her internationalism, which I know you witnessed yourself. So, that Chisholm's Caribbean background is a pretty intriguing part of who she was.
How old was she when she came back from
10.
She was asking how old she was when she came back. 10 years old, yeah. So formative years for sure. I probably shouldn't dwell on this a lot longer, but it still is intriguing about how much, you know, this was sort of only kind of the first incarnation of how other people in power tried to marginalize her or tell her to wait her turn or you're not one of us kind of problem too, you know, that happened all the way through the National Convention where, you know, with Ron Dellums and, you know, where she, you know, where the men just sort of wouldn't come on board for all those other reasons. And, you know, and whether, you know, that was almost the first instance where, you know, she was always trying to talk unity and they were always trying to talk about what's my part of the unity, you know. So maybe even just a little bit more on how, you know, that whole dynamic not only had repercussions then about how, you know, the left and the Democrats were splintered, but I think it applies now almost as much, right? Where, you know, there's just a lot of factionalism that, you know, hurts the cause of people who are honoring her legacy and hoping to pursue it.
Yeah, that was a mess. I think that's the most technical way I can put it. So, jumping ahead to Chisholm's presidential campaign, she had already been a magnetic figure in Congress. She kind of landed with a splash. She hired this all-women team of staffers. This is before Paul and Bob. And the newspapers picked up on her. She gave this fiery speech about the Vietnam War. And then college students started inviting her because she was an anti-war congresswoman. She would give speeches against the war, so the kids wanted her to run. So she's getting a lot of attention, and she thought it was that attention that some of the guys resented. She came into Congress she was there with 7 other black congressmen, or 8, well, if you count Ed Brooke. And she was up there with the most notorious ones, but she was the only woman. So she immediately, she shared a lot with other black members, but she also had this focus on women's issues, and she didn't see black freedom struggle and feminist issues as being different. She thought that they encompassed each other. That was not shared by just about anyone else on the Hill. Again, we think of this intersectional idea as being, oh, sure, yeah, people have intersecting interests. That was not natural to many of her colleagues, but what she did was educate them about, well, see, look, I'm interested in this issue. This is why you should be interested in this issue. You don't have the same identity I do. Nobody here does for 4 years. Nobody has the same interests, exact body that I have, but we do care about fair wages. We do care about lack of government persecution, for the Panthers, for other groups on the left. We care about all these things, so let's collaborate. And she was a genius at coalition. But what these guys thought, and what other political movers and shakers thought, was that she was trying to divide people. So on the campaign trail, she said she got some unheartening responses from feminists, most of whom were white, and black politicians who were mostly men. What she said about white women was that their support was lukewarm, and that they just wouldn't say, okay, I'm gonna support you and stick by it. That's what happened with Bella Abzug, for example, because they were working together before. In 1971, they almost got universal child care passed. It actually was passed by both houses and got to President Nixon's desk. And he vetoed it on the advice of our dear departed Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Bless his heart. Imagine if Nixon had signed that bill. Universal child care in the United States. It's just, and it was, so anyway, I'm going back to her relationship with white feminists. She had this very cordial relationship before the presidential campaign. During the campaign, everybody said, oh, we love Shirley Chisholm, we love her. Wouldn't vote for her. Delegates who were, except for Betty Friedan, who stuck with her, but most of the delegates who she wanted to vote for her, who were women, did not. With the guys, she experienced hostility. So it wasn't sort of lukewarm, hey, we love you, but no, we're not gonna vote for you. It was, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You haven't paid your dues. You're from a different place. You're a woman. Where were you when we did X, Y, Z? Where were you for the Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana? Where were you for the gathering in Northfield, somewhere in the Midwest? Last year, when we were deciding if a black man should run, and there are these articles in The Nation. Should a black man run for president? And so she experienced a lot of outright hostility, to the point where at the convention, she addresses both the Women's Caucus and the Men's Caucus, and the Men's Caucus, and the Black Caucus. She addresses the Women's Caucus, and one of the witnesses there, she got this huge standing ovation. George McGovern did not get a standing ovation. George McGovern got, well, I guess we have to vote for him. And he was the nominee. She got a standing ovation, and Ellen Goodman, good Bostonian, Boston Globe, interviewed one of the women standing there clapping, and the woman said, "Oh, I just love her, but I can't vote for her, so I'm guilty. I'm like, it's like I'm clapping out the guilt, because I'm not going to vote for her." A delegate at the convention. At the Black Caucus, she gave another speech that was received with incredible enthusiasm by the rank and file delegates, men and women. Then Charlie Diggs, who was the head of the Black Caucus, he was angry, walked off the stage, and all the operatives there whipped that delegation into shape, and got most of them to vote for McGovern. There was a little bit of a mutiny in the first ballot, and she got 151 and a fraction votes. So a few people had kind of broken ranks and voted for her. That was the most votes that any woman or black person would get until black person, Jesse Jackson in 1984, so it was 12 years later. For a woman, it was 2008.
Oh, no.
Hillary Clinton. So her record stood for a while. But it was that hostility that she would say later was the most scarring. She had no time for the women who had not supported her. She stopped going to National Women's Political Caucus meetings. She would send Shirley Downs. She kind of lost interest in dealing with them, but with the guys, she just was really hurt, and did work with them later on, but it just was, it was one of the things that she felt was so hurtful. She ran because she was hoping to get a coalition. She was hoping that she could get women, black people, poor people, Latina people, kids, anti-war protesters. She was hoping she would get the people who didn't have a lot of power in politics to glom together and then use that pressure on the eventual nominee, who was George McGovern, and on the party platform. That was the point. That was why she ran. So the thing that, besides being mad at some people for either not supporting her or actively standing in her way, her great disappointment was that her coalition didn't come together, that people fought amongst themselves. And so that was kind of, she said she lost weight it wasn't hard for her to lose weight, but she lost weight during the campaign and had to really recover from that disappointment, of all things.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think she had the precedent, essentially, of her first elections in Brooklyn of making that coalition work. She sort of realized, as I recall from your book, that actually most of the voters were women, which somehow the male candidates overlooked, and that it wasn't that difficult for her to harness them at that scale. But nobody could see her vision, once she got up into the national politics level of trying to unify in a way that, again, would have changed the country. But and speaking of changing the country, we probably should talk a little bit about Title IX too, and her efforts with that, and how that did change the country.
Yeah, so the trick with Title IX is the trick with a lot of legislation that she had a very strong stamp on. As you know, her name isn't on much legislation at all. As a sponsor, she's a co-sponsor a bunch of places, but among a big list. So her work on Title IX, so this is Title IX of the, was it 19, and amendments, there's 1972 amendments to the Higher Education Act of 1965, is that, I think I've got that right. But it's Title IX. It's what, it's what we understand now as mandating equality in sports and then mandating a response to hostile work or education environment. So it's now in the news because of sexual harassment or sexual assault on college campuses. But it also led to a lot of new sports programs, and she was in those hearings. She was on Education and Labor, the committee, at the point when Title IX was being debated. The whole set of amendments was being debated. And what was interesting is that she was really good at talking to individual colleagues on the Hill and educating them. She was an early childhood education teacher. That was her first career. And it wasn't that different on Capitol Hill.
Well, her students were younger on Capitol Hill.
Yes.
Intellectually and emotionally.
Yes. Perhaps not chronologically. Yeah. So she was a teacher, and she loved to educate. So there are these stories about, for several bills, there are these stories about her having colleagues in the office who might or might not have wanted to be seen there. I don't know if you ever encountered this, but certainly for Title IX, for the minimum wage bill, she would have these people, these men come and come and see her, and they would talk about the bill. Or sometimes the folks would ask her staffers, especially Shirley Down, colleagues would ask her staffers as they're sitting down at the committee meeting for a vote or going to the floor, what is this? What are we voting on? And so Shirley Downs would tell them, well, okay, we're voting this way because of this, and explain it to them. So there are all these staff, and you can talk about this too, these staff to staff relationships. If, say, there's a bill that's up that relates to another committee, well, Laura Murphy could go and talk to her staffer friend on the other, for the congressperson on the other committee and say, hey, we're really interested in this. We're hoping to see this, and so those connections are incredibly important. And Chisholm empowered her staff to do this. So when it came to Title IX, it came to light that through, I think it was through Shirley Downs, that one of the obstructionists, I'm not remembering whose name it was, someone was obstructing because they were worried about girls in boys' sports, but that other obstructionists had daughters and wanted them to have equal opportunities. And so she would sort of figure out and allow staffers to go figure out who these people were and then go talk to them and say, hey, this isn't threatening to you. This is actually going to be a good thing. And because sometimes those arbitrary concerns are what's preventing somebody from voting a certain way. So her behind-the-scenes work is far more significant on Title IX than actually what she was out there doing.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because the 7 years I spent working for John Conyers, too, he probably was the most left-leaning member of Congress. But, when people say, well, how come you haven't sponsored all these bills, which somehow is supposed to be meaningful in some ways, but he said, first of all, nobody would ever vote for a bill I sponsored. But second of all, I'm not going to be a legislative junkie. That was his term, where, he would just, sponsor bills and put them out there knowing they had no chance. It was a waste of everybody's time, essentially. And the people who were far more effective were people like Mrs. Chisholm, who actually did the field work of getting people to support things, in a educational and educator way like she did. So that was, I mean, that's the way politics works. You can sponsor, craft and sponsor a zillion bills, but that's not legislating, and that's not what happened. She had asked me to prepare a bill on migrant workers. She felt very strongly about the plight of the Cesar Chavez people. And, we prepared the bill, so at one point, I was talking to those people. I said, oh, God, no, don't introduce a bill, this is a labor issue, this isn't legislative. And she said, again, this is sort of the same thing again. What's wrong with these people? Why would that be a problem to have a two-pronged approach, and raise the issue legislatively as well as, in negotiations with the grape growers? It's I think, this ongoing story of people sort of resenting the fact that she was effective and forceful and saying, oh, we don't want to do it your way, we want to do it our way, which, by the way, isn't going to work, but we're going to do it our way anyway. So it was unfortunate. I should probably just take a minute, too, about the speech writing, because I guess that's kind of why I'm here, in addition to having a nice chat with my friend. But, yes, I came on, and she asked me to write one speech, and I had a kind of a music background, and I'd listened to a zillion bad speeches in politics over the years, and knowing that Mrs. Chisholm certainly was going to be able to deliver a good speech if one was presented to her. So I wrote one, and she liked it in her educator way. I got the draft back, typed on my IBM Selectric with the orator ball, those big letters. And then there was, these little red things, good point, excellent, Bob, thank you. There was no A on the top, but it was getting pretty close to that. So I ended up writing 84 speeches for her, and keeping in mind these were not delivered on the floor of Congress. She, at that time, has always had a very active speechifying career outside of Washington, D.C. So she would get a request from some group to speak to her, college, commencement, whatever. She would give me the invitational letter, and I would produce a speech based on that. So, and apparently she liked them and delivered them, and we had a good symbiotic relationship from that. Plus, I got to work remotely. I guess that was a good thing, because when I got the speech assignment, I could say sayonara to the office, and I'd go home a couple of days and try not to smoke cigarettes while I was writing these. I instead was eating raw spaghetti strands, but to keep my mouth busy. It's a good way to not smoke, by the way. Well, and part of that was because I was getting every congressional office, I was getting free cigarettes from the tobacco lobby. So it was difficult not to smoke. You just say your brand, and that brown wrapper would come every week. Fortunately, the gun lobby didn't have the same program. We've got enough guns around, but so that was the process. And I would then bring back the speech, and she would be happy to go deliver it. I only heard her deliver one of my speeches in person, but. I think, again, because of my music training too, I was sort of able to hear her voice and hear her deliver. And there are strategies in speech writing, like rhythmic triads and repetition with emphasis, those kinds of things, which a lot of people who deliver speeches don't understand, and they think that a speech is just an article that you write down and then you read it. And there's nothing worse. It has to be an auditory experience. So that's my 2 minutes worth of why I'm up here. But it was something that I enjoyed doing, and now I write speeches for myself, which is also fun. Paul, please.
I just want to say, I do now recall some discussion about your remote working within the office. So we'll just go on.
Oh, okay, yeah.
A memory came back to me.
Yeah, that's right. How come Bob gets to work at home? Yeah. He should be able to write a speech with this, 8 black women, talking about sex the whole time while I'm trying to write this.
And Paul.
And Paul, right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. You might be the loudest one, right? So that's good. I guess we should probably move to Q&A. Clearly, we're in Provincetown. I don't know if there's anything about Mrs. Chisholm and gays that you want to say since we're here. It's not much in the book, but I think if there's something connecting those two, you could say something about it.
Yeah,
Chisholm also was pretty sympathetic to, I think, what she called gay rights at that time. And I think what you're pointing to is the memorable experience of the church in Boston, at the Black Church. Do you remember that?
No, tell us.
During her 1972 campaign and a visit to Boston, she was at a Black church in Roxbury giving a speech, and apparently a group of guys in drag showed up and started, call and responding her speech. Right on, Sister Shirley. And so apparently there was a lot of consternation from the preacher and some of the church elders, because this was not a space in which gay folks or genderqueer, or however those folks would identify then or now. And so she seemed delighted to have these folks there. And she said, I'm trying to remember who she said it to, but, she said it in an interview later in life. She said, I felt like I was representing everybody, and I welcomed gay GLBT folks to my campaign, and I really thought that getting political power to everybody was important. And there was, I guess she would say that she didn't have any particular platform where she was overtly in favor of gay rights, but she did talk about gay rights, and she did see that, she thought that gay rights were an important part of her own platform. So that particular instance, it's sort of, she remembered it sort of as this comic thing, which, it was probably a great performance. But then also, she said, that was great. I had no problem with folks coming in and making that performance. Were you there?
No, I happened to listen to a podcast yesterday about Chisholm, that some friends of mine happened, it's called Curwood Biographies, and it was about her. It was pretty amazing that just coincidentally I saw that you were speaking today. And on the podcast they discussed it, not even this incident or a similar one, where in addition to her talking about inclusivity, she also, she was having to deflect some criticism from more conservative people for having accepted support from these queer supporters. And apparently her comment, because she was known for being an excellent dresser herself, she said, most importantly, I'd really like to ask those people for some of those outfits.
Yes, that does sound like her. What you raise is a good point. She also got some flack for supporting the Black Panther Party. The big one, there were multiple Black Panther parties, but the one that's most famous from Oakland, California, with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And she, when she campaigned in California, she got support from them. And they actually had a fundraiser. Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, was the organizer of a fundraiser at Huey Newton's penthouse in Oakland. He was not there because he realized that the security force, I'm having a
FBI?
No. Secret Service, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, golly.
Sorry.
That Secret Service would be there, and they didn't want any cops there. And so Huey didn't show up. But there she was, and again, she got criticism for dealing with these radicals. Why would you? And she said, well, they raised some good points. And they're supporting me. Why wouldn't I?
And they also fed children in Oakland, because I used to work with them. They also had a huge feeding program in Oakland.
Yes.
But if I could, just two things. One, I don't know if you wrote the speech when I was at San Francisco State. She came and spoke and rallied the. I don't remember of course we were dominated by the war then. That's all we ever did. But her speech galvanized the campus like nobody had ever done before. It was truly remarkable, and I will always remember that. You probably don't recall if that was your speech or not.
I'll take the credit.
It
It must have been.
And the Panthers were there, which added another layer, but Huey was in jail then. That was during those years, but she was really, it was a remarkable speech, and I had the privilege of interviewing her after because I was this green as grass reporter for the campus TV station, and she was so wonderful to this very naive and inexperienced reporter, and I will always, always remember it. But my question to you is, what do you think Mrs. Chisholm's, because she was all about collaboration. She was like Tip O'Neill in a way. You got to bring both sides in, otherwise nothing's going to happen. And given the extraordinary schisms we have now between the major left and the major right, knowing her as you do, writing for her, what do you think her take on this, or solution, or feeling?
I'll let you answer. I'll just say Dramamine.
Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing, is that she understood that you could have coalition and not give up your own deeply held convictions, which I think is lost. The procedural or the both sides stuff now is almost like, well, you know, I'm agnostic, there are both sides. No, you don't have to be agnostic and see both sides. And she would say, no, stand for what do you care about? What do you really care about? And then how could you possibly get somewhere with other folks who don't share a lot of your identity or affiliation? And you guys can comment on this. The what we call polarization, but I see as this sort of deep personal identification with political alignment now. I don't know that you all, when you were working on the Hill, if you saw that. The nearly solid alignment of conservatism with the Republican Party as partisanism. That those things weren't, those things didn't necessarily work that way. That conservatism was possible without, and was not so wedded to the Republican Party formally as it is now. So I don't, you know, wasn't dealing with that particular problem, but she was dealing, remember, she got to Congress in 1969. I argue, and I tell my students this, we hadn't really been a real participatory democracy until 4 years before that, 1965, because of the Voting Rights Act. She's dealing with these authoritarian terrorists, those who upheld those white supremacist regimes in multiple states in the Union, especially the former Confederacy, but not all. Like, it's rough.
And back then, most of them were Democrats.
And they were Democrats.
Back then, the parties were reversed.
Yeah, well, there's sort of these fractions of those folks that are the solid Democratic South. There were Northern Democrats, of which she was one, and the Republican Party had not taken all those Southern Democrats for its own. But remember that those Southern Democrats, those segregationists, where did they go? So she was dealing with the Jim Crow faction in Congress, and I dare anyone now to say that there's a faction in Congress that is as hardline and as authoritarian. She didn't waste her time necessarily with those folks. She might have thought, okay, well, they're not coming around. But there were some folks on the edges who she did collaborate with. The most famous one, of course, was George Wallace, who wasn't actually in Congress. But on the campaign trail, Wallace got shot in Maryland, which he won, by the way, the primary. Maryland, not Mississippi, Maryland. She went to visit him in a hospital in Maryland, just outside the district, stayed for about 15 minutes, and she said, look, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. You know, neither one of us had Secret Service protection at that point. He took that to heart. When she was trying to get minimum wage for domestic service, he actually called some of his buddies in Congress and got them to vote for it. His Southern segregationist friends. That was a useful alliance, but it's because she had connected with him on this human level. So I don't think that's not a possibility anymore, and I think also coalitions are important. No, ideological purity, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Like, it's just not. But you can have these convictions and find somebody who you can talk to who would perhaps support what you think should happen, maybe on their own grounds, but they might be supportive of it. So give it a shot. So it's the same, but it's different.
Okay, I think we have a few more minutes, right? So, and as much as we'd both like to talk your ears off, we should probably have a few more questions if there's anybody else. Yes, sir?
I'm just curious, is there any record of her working with Biden in his early days at all? There would have been some overlap potentially.
Yeah, so I haven't found it, but it doesn't mean, I mean, I'd have to dig deep into committee stuff and, yeah, it's a good question, so I task the next scholar.
Are there any other big names of today, and there wouldn't be that many left, that she is known to have worked with back then?
Well, names of the past decade or two. So Jack Kemp was at her wedding, second wedding. On Rules, she was working with Trent Lott. Who else was on Rules?
Paul would remember, right?
Well, Dims, Joe Moakley was there, and then Gillis Long. I remember these two in particular because the year, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but the Valentine's Day before she left, we went into the Rules Committee, and the two of them were sitting next to her, and they sat down, and on the rule, I have a copy of it, on the Rules Committee stationery, they wrote her a Valentine. And if you go back, how they were going to miss Shirley C. And if you go back there, there's a lot of misogyny to it, but it also was like a very beautiful moment. She had, she had won over these colleagues. Now, Joe Moakley wasn't something she had won over, but Gillis Long, Louisiana Democrat, and I think everybody on the Rules Committee respected her greatly. But there were some far right wingers. Bob Bauman, I don't know if you remember him. Bob Bauman was on. Trent Lott was there.
I read it in the Congressional Record or in the hearings. I think it was in the Rules Committee records where there's a dispute about should she be called, as everybody else was called, by an honorific in her last name, Mrs. Chisholm.
Right.
And so she got into a tiff with the chair, and she said, I need you to call me Mrs. Chisholm. Why are you calling me Shirley? He was calling her Shirley.
Yeah. What's that?
But then he said, oh, well, come on now, Shirley, we're old friends. And what she said then was, well, yes, but we don't have to let them know it, do we?
She knew how to work it. She really did. What I will tell you that I thought was so interesting in reading your book and coming across some of these issues she dealt with, and also when I saw the documentary, and she's there in the documentary talking about it's time we have, and she did say Native American because that wasn't what we used then, but a Native American as Secretary of the Interior.
Yeah.
And that was so many years ago, and we do, now we do. And you were talking about, Title I compensatory education for poor performing schools and low income schools. Now here we have, last week, the Republicans, 80%, I believe it was 80% of the cuts that they put forth were in the Title I program. 50% of the total, but a huge amount there. And so it's all just so fascinating. Oh man, there was one other. You just keep coming across them. That she was very prescient about what was going to come. changed
Yeah.
things.
And she did leave, she got tired.
Oh, the last thing I was saying about something, we worked on fair testing and standardized testing. Now that was, and now you have colleges, and it was a recognition of how economically disadvantaged and minority students were getting screwed in standardized testing years ago. And now colleges and universities are no longer accepting SATs. Oh, the College Board was in every other day in our office.
Nan, are we out of time? Okay.
So I have a question because the title of your book is Shirley Chisholm, Black Feminist, Political Leader.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Betty Friedan supported her, like Gloria Steinem, did she support her? And then who did she influence, mentor in the Black feminist movement?
Oh, yeah. Betty Friedan, she and Betty Friedan had been corresponding since she was in the New York State Assembly, since at least 1967. And Friedan did support her, was a delegate, had a little cringeworthy moment trying to campaign on Chisholm's behalf. She brought a wagon full of watermelons to Harlem to try to campaign for. So, but did.
She meant well.
Stayed in. Whereas most of the other founders of the National Black Women's Political Caucus, or National Women's Political Caucus, Steinem and Abzug did not formally stand behind her. And so that was a source of fracture. But yeah, so Black women were her staunchest supporters by far. And her most, perhaps, flamboyant supporter was Flo Kennedy of the Feminist Party. And so Flo Kennedy started all these chapters of the Feminist Party, and their first action in 1972, the first action was to support Shirley Chisholm for president. And she went out campaigning college campuses. She was right out there for Chisholm. But there are other women who we wouldn't know of, Black Florida state legislators, Black women who were Florida state legislators, Black women who were legislators anywhere, especially Barbara Lee in California. A foundational moment for her was working for Chisholm's campaign, and then, obviously she started working for Ron Dellums and kept moving on. Maxine Waters was an early supporter of Chisholm's, was at a party at Diane Carroll's house in 1972. Donna Brazil was the first executive director of the National Political Congress of Black Women that Chisholm co-founded immediately after leaving office. And that was an incubator for a lot of Black women aspirants to political office. So, those were the folks who supported her the most, and those were the folks who seemed to get the most boost back from her, and a lot of support in terms of political advancement.
Thank you guys so much. I'm delighted.